Have you ever wondered, can quiet, unspoken protection quietly transform into a feeling that crosses every boundary when both people are desperately lacking warmth? Isn't it true that the most tense relationship of all might be the one between two lonely adults trapped together in the same house under the lingering gaze of someone who has already passed away? Let us listen to the story of Emily and Thomas. This white two-story colonial house in a quiet Philadelphia suburb has always been silent. After the horrific car accident on I-95, that silence was no longer peaceful. It became a void capable of swallowing everything whole. Emily, at 28, was left only with her black funeral dress and vacant eyes staring out at the backyard covered in fallen red maple leaves. Her husband, Liam, had left forever, taking with him every sound, every rhythm of the life they once shared. Now, only she and Thomas remained her father-in-law, a 7-year-old man widowed long ago, now forced to witness the departure of his only son. Fate's arrangement was truly cruel. They, daughter-in-law and father-in-law, suddenly became the last survivors of a shattered family. They shared dinners, slept under the same roof, yet the distance between them stretched wider than the Milky Way. Every dinner consisted of 3 simple, warm dishes placed on the oak kitchen table, accompanied by a silence as heavy as lead. Emily knew Thomas always tried to cook the food she liked: meatloaf with gravy, mashed potatoes, or a simple baked apple pie. It was a silent form of comfort, wordless. His gaze often rested on her plate, a fleeting, shy glance that never dared linger too long. It carried the pity of a father, the regret of an older man, and something else Emily could not yet name. Thomas was a simple, quiet man who had spent over 20 years as an auto mechanic. All day, he busied himself with house repairs, mowing the backyard lawn, and tending to a few small maple trees on the back porch. His broad shoulders seemed to sag under private burdens. Emily often found him sitting alone in the living room, lit only by a single dim floor lamp. His shadow stretched across the wood-paneled wall. It was an image of terrifying loneliness and stillness. Sometimes Emily wanted to say something, anything, to break the suffocating atmosphere, but her throat felt blocked by a knot of unspoken grief. One night, Emily couldn't sleep. The soft ticking of the heater and the slow turning of the ceiling fan only deepened the emptiness. She noticed light from the hallway slipping through the slightly ajar bedroom door. She knew it was Thomas. He always did this. Around 10 p.m., he would quietly check the front door, back door, and garage, then place a warm glass of milk on the small table beside her bedroom door. The ritual repeated every night without words. Emily never opened the door immediately. She waited until his footsteps faded, then took the milk. The warmth from the glass spread through her palms, a physical, safe warmth, yet carrying an intensely private and intimate message. It wasn't romance. It was care without expectation, a kind of protection she desperately needed. Once, Emily forgot to turn off her bedroom light. The next morning, she woke to find it already off. She knew it was Thomas. He must have stood outside, waiting until he was sure she was deeply asleep, then gently opened the half-closed door, stepped in as lightly as possible, and unplugged the lamp. That bold yet deeply respectful action made Emily feel ashamed of her carelessness, but at the same time stirred an indescribable tremor. It felt like a child being sheltered, yet carried the sensitivity of an adult woman. Emily's inner conflict began from these tiny things. She started observing Thomas more closely. The way he held the wrench to fix the sink pipe, the way he watched the evening news intently, even the way he cleared his throat softly. She realized that behind the gruff, awkward exterior was still a strong, deeply lonely man. His loneliness mirrored hers, but from a different angle, the angle of maturity and experience. Their relationship became an invisible, taut rubber band. Each passing day, they drew a little closer, not through words, but through small gestures, accidental glances at doorways and wooden stair corners. The tension wasn't negative, it was a quiet stimulation, an oversensitivity to each other's presence. Emily knew if that band snapped, everything would become chaos and taboo. Yet somehow, she wanted to stretch it just a little more, just to feel the aliveness of emotions that had been frozen for too long. One autumn afternoon, Emily was cleaning the living room while Thomas sat reading the local newspaper on the old leather sofa. She bent down to pick up the fallen TV remote. Her loose sweater slipped off one shoulder. In that moment, she felt Thomas's gaze. It wasn't leering, it was startled, embarrassed, then quickly averted back to the paper. That hurried avoidance, that instant self-restraint, felt more seductive than any flirtation. Emily's cheeks flushed. She stood up straight. She knew they were both standing on the edge of an intimacy that should not exist. The only humor in this house sometimes came from Thomas's clumsiness. Once he tried to bake a pumpkin pie for Emily following an online recipe, but forgot the sugar. When Emily tasted it, her face twisted. Thomas saw and laughed, a rare, dry, but genuine laugh. Emily laughed too. That brief laughter dispelled some of the gloom that enveloped everything. "Dad, try again. Next time I'll show you how," Emily said, her voice much softer. It was the first time she spoke to him so comfortably, without the barrier of grief. As night fell and the half-open door let in the familiar yellow light from the hallway, Emily lay in bed, breathing in the scent of warm milk. She closed her eyes. She knew she stood at a crossroads. One path was duty and respect for the departed. The other was the longing to be protected, to be loved in an adult way by the man sharing this roof. And tonight, the warmth from that glass of milk seemed to stretch the thin rubber band inside her heart even tighter. That night, Philadelphia's sky poured down a cold autumn rain. The rain wasn't just water, it was sound, a sound that highlighted the emptiness inside the house. Emily curled up under thick blankets, seeking warmth, but the cold seemed to seep into her very bones. She remembered the days filled with laughter, arguments, the clatter of life now gone, leaving only silence and the roaring rain outside the windows. Loneliness was no longer just a state of mind. It had become a physical weight pressing on her chest, making it hard to breathe. Emily sat up, pacing the room. She couldn't sleep. Every heartbeat felt like a lament for what was missing, not just a life partner, but a solid anchor, the warm shelter of an adult. She suddenly thought of Thomas. Was he sleeping in the opposite room, equally cold and quiet? The protection he offered her each night through milk and a half-open door seemed only a temporary remedy, a sedative too weak. She knew Thomas was also struggling with solitude and loss, in his own silent, stoic way. The rain grew heavier. Emily decided to go downstairs. She needed hot tea, or perhaps just to move a little to ease the suffocation. She quietly opened her door and stepped into the dark hallway. The faint golden light from the small family altar with Liam's photo cast long, hazy shadows on the wooden staircase. When she reached the ground floor, Emily was startled to see Thomas. He sat on the back porch, the old Adirondack chair creaking under his weight. He wore only a thin flannel shirt, broad shoulders tense against the cold and the rain. No porch light was on. He simply sat gazing into the white curtain of rain covering the backyard and wet lawn. His solitude and burden were clearer than ever. The sight hit Emily like a blow to the chest. He was no longer just a protective father-in-law, he was a man laid bare, raw with sorrow and quiet despair. A powerful wave of emotion surged in her, surpassing the usual boundaries of respect. It was pity, deep empathy, and a trace of desire to share that burden with him. Emily stood frozen at the kitchen door for a long moment, hesitating. Should she approach? Would that cross the line between daughter-in-law and father-in-law? But the cold outside, the loneliness of two souls sharing the same pain, urged her forward. This was her first truly bold act, not for physical desire, but for the explosion of a spiritual need to connect. She quietly turned on the kettle on the gas stove, found the ginger tea she often made. The soft sound of boiling water felt like a whispered confession. She poured the tea, steam blurred her vision slightly. Holding the hot cup, she slowly walked to the back porch. "Dad, you'll freeze sitting out here." Her voice was soft, almost swallowed by the rain. Thomas started turning around. In the darkness, his eyes narrowed slightly, embarrassment clear. He had completely let his guard down. "Oh, Emily, I couldn't sleep." His voice was low and hoarse, like distant thunder. Emily stepped closer, placed the cup on the small wooden table beside him. Warmth immediately spread, carrying the sharp scent of ginger to chase away some of the damp chill. She didn't sit, just stood looking at him. "It's raining so hard. Drink the hot tea to warm up, Dad." Thomas looked at the cup, then at her. His gaze lingered on her face longer than usual. This time, it wasn't shy avoidance, but acceptance, a clear acknowledgement of the intimacy unfolding. Those eyes were deep, holding too many unspoken things. "Thank you, dear," he said. His tone carried an unconcealed wariness. He picked up the cup. His rough, middle-aged hands trembled slightly. The warmth from the cup seemed to flow not only into his hands, but into the tense air between them. Emily sat in the Adirondack chair opposite. They sat in silence, listening to the rain on the porch roof, sharing the suffocating yet warm atmosphere. I couldn't sleep either," Emily whispered. Thomas replied. Just one sound, but it held complete understanding without explanation. Their connection at that moment was no longer familial, it was the bond of two lonely souls. Neither dared mention Liam, but his presence hovered like a ghost, making this moment both forbidden and precious. After a while, Thomas finally spoke, his voice even, like recounting a very old story. He talked about fixing the back porch roof, about unfinished plans, about Liam's dreams when he was alive. Emily listened, watching raindrops slide down the window panes. He spoke haltingly, often pausing as if weighing every word to stay within emotional boundaries. "Do you feel the burden, Dad?" Emily asked, not looking at him, but her voice full of genuine concern. Thomas took a deep breath. He set the cup down. The heat had faded. He looked at her this time, his eyes burned brighter, admitting his vulnerability for the first time. "There is a burden, but I can't leave you alone. Emily, you're still so young." The phrase, "you're still so young," wasn't reproach, it was carefully wrapped protection. Emily felt the strong sense of possession and responsibility he placed on himself, a feeling that transcended ordinary family ties. Emily said nothing, but she reached out and lightly touched his shoulder. A feather-light touch, yet a huge turning point in their relationship. Her cold hand met the thin flannel of his shirt, feeling the warmth of his skin pass through. It was an unconscious gesture, pure comfort, yet carried the sensuality of absolute closeness and trust. Thomas flinched slightly, but he didn't push her hand away. He only bowed his head a little, as if accepting the touch. In that instant, the tension didn't lessen, it intensified, becoming an invisible static electricity enveloping them both. After a few seconds, Emily withdrew her hand, ashamed and flustered by her boldness. She tried to deflect with light humor. "Oh, Dad, that pumpkin pie you made the other day, I almost thought you put salt in it instead." She smiled softly, deliberately easing the atmosphere. Thomas laughed a longer, more relaxed laugh this time. He shook his head. "All right, from now on I'll just stick to cooking dinner. Baking is your job." Balance was restored, loneliness was shared, and the boundary, slightly breached, was respectfully reset with a joke. Yet both knew that shoulder touch and deep look in the rainy night would leave an indelible mark on their taut rubber band. As the rain eased, Emily stood up. "I'm going to bed now. You should go inside too, Dad. It's cold." Thomas nodded, his eyes warmer. "Yes, good night, dear." Emily climbed the wooden stairs, glanced back at Thomas once more. He was still sitting there, but his shadow seemed less lonely. She knew tonight's glass of milk would no longer be the sole symbol of protection. Now they had shared another kind of warmth, the warmth of empathy and spiritual connection, something forbidden yet necessary for them to continue living in this house. From that rainy night onward, the thin rubber band between Emily and Thomas seemed to loosen just a little, not to reduce tension, but to allow them to come closer within a new, more fragile boundary. Emily began noticing small details about Thomas that she had previously overlooked. His hands were no longer just the rough hands of a mechanic, they were hands that gently placed a glass of milk, that carefully trimmed the lawn. She saw more clearly the fatigue under his eyes, the boundless patience as he tried to suppress his own loneliness. Emily's inner conflict grew larger. She wondered whether this comfort and protection was the same kind of feeling that Thomas's late wife, and even her late husband Liam had once given him. Guilt crept in like thick fog, covering every moment she felt warmth beside Thomas. She often stood in front of the bathroom mirror, questioning the silent betrayal in her mind. What was she seeking? Love? Or simply a safe embrace that demanded nothing and judged nothing? The peak of this unintended intimacy came when Emily caught a bad cold from the changing season. That morning, she woke with a splitting headache and a body that felt broken. She tried to make her way downstairs, but as soon as she left her room, she staggered. She had to grip the stair railing, gasping for breath. Thomas appeared immediately. He was preparing breakfast, coffee, and scrambled eggs, but hearing the unusual noise, he rushed over. His face showed clear worry, an expression Emily had never seen so plainly. He didn't say much, he just acted. "Go back to your room and lie down, you're burning up." His voice was low and firm, carrying an order Emily couldn't resist. Like an obedient child, she let Thomas guide her back to bed. The feeling of his hand on her arm, a quick but strong and steady touch, made her tremble. Not from fever, but from a strange current running down her spine. This physical closeness in her moment of weakness pushed their boundaries further than ever. All that day, Thomas took on the role of tireless caregiver. He drove to the pharmacy for cold medicine, checked her temperature with the digital thermometer, made hot chicken noodle soup. When he brought the bowl to her, Emily looked at him. He had taken off his outer jacket, wearing only an old t-shirt. His careful gestures as he blew on each spoonful, his attentive eyes watching her, made Emily feel as if she were being drawn into a safe, enveloping whirlpool. In the haze of illness, Emily watched Thomas. Her vision blurred, but she could still clearly see his figure bustling beside her. She felt him place his hand on her forehead, a gentle, reassuring touch. It was the touch of a father, of family. But for Emily, it was also the touch of the protection she had longed for so long. She felt the sharp difference between passionate romantic love and this warm, all-encompassing care. Thomas's feeling carried responsibility and permanence, like a lighthouse in a vast sea. Emily drifted into sleep. When she woke, she noticed one important, haunting detail: her bedroom door. Normally, Thomas only left it half open when he placed milk or turned off the light. That was respect for her private space. Yet it left a gap for concern. But today, the door had been opened about a hand's width. Not fully open, not closed, it rested in an in-between position, a silent announcement that he was always ready and watching over her. The implication of this action was enormous. It said that in her moment of greatest weakness, every physical and emotional boundary could be loosened to allow uninterrupted care. Through the crack in the door, Emily saw his shadow downstairs at the desk, quietly reading. She felt his presence, and safe presence, yet carrying an invisible pressure. She knew Thomas wasn't sleeping. He kept himself awake so he could respond immediately if she needed anything. Emily began to enjoy, or more accurately, to cling to these moments of being cared for by Thomas. She lingered longer when talking to him, deliberately found excuses for him to touch her, even if only to check the thermometer or hold her hand to steady her. These gestures, harmless on the surface, were bricks building a forbidden temple in her soul. She didn't want him to leave, didn't want him to return to silence and ordinary distance. One evening, when Emily's fever had broken, she went downstairs to heat herself a glass of milk. Thomas was there too, washing dishes at the sink. "Feeling better?" he asked without turning around. "Much better, Dad. You don't have to worry anymore." Thomas paused. He turned to look at her, still holding the dish towel. This time his gaze was direct, no longer hesitant or evasive. It was an evaluating look, confirming she was safe. "How could I not worry?" he said, voice lower. "In this house there are only the two of us. If you get sick, who else can I turn to?" The sentence carried a touch of dry humor about their mutual dependence, instantly easing the sudden tension. Emily laughed, a bright laugh after the illness, making her face even gentler. "You're teasing again. You're the pillar here. As long as you stay healthy, I feel safe." Thomas smiled faintly. He stepped closer to Emily, not with any intimate intent, but simply to place the towel on the counter. In that brief moment, the distance between them was suddenly less than an arm's length. Emily felt breathless. She looked straight into his eyes, a searching look, probing the deep secrets in his heart. She saw loneliness and suppressed emotion in his gaze. She felt an invisible warmth radiating from him, like the warmth of milk magnified many times. Emily decided to make a small gesture, a surrender, yielding to this protection. Without a word, she tilted her head slightly and rested her temple lightly against his arm for just 1 second. It was a fragile touch, crossing every boundary they had tried to maintain. Thomas stood perfectly still. He didn't respond, but he didn't retreat either. He simply held his position like a statue, accepting her bold yet vulnerable touch. His silence was the most powerful answer. After a second of inner struggle and suffocation, Emily pulled back. She knew she had gone too far, but she felt no regret, only burning cheeks. I'm going to bed now, she said, her voice trembling slightly. Thomas replied, his voice also a little hoarse. Good night, dear. Emily turned and climbed the stairs, not daring to look back. She knew tonight her bedroom door would surely be left open a little wider, and she would accept that forbidden protection. In her illness, she had found a comfort she never expected, a feeling woven from loss, loneliness, and trembling boundaries. After the illness, the relationship between Emily and Thomas entered a new phase. It was no longer full of shy avoidance, but a silent acceptance of the deep connection that now existed. Emily had been completely drawn into the protective circle Thomas had woven, and she felt guilty for it. She often looked at Liam's photo on the small altar in the living room, wondering if he resented her weakness and longing for shelter. This inner tearing exhausted her, yet she could not tear herself away from the haunting warmth Thomas offered. As for Thomas, he became even more conflicted in the face of Emily's closeness and need for care. The shoulder touch, the brief resting of her head during her illness, had etched themselves deeply into his mind. He began suppressing his emotions more extremely. He spoke less, focused on working in the garage or on the lawn to create physical and emotional distance. Yet his care never diminished, it was simply wrapped more carefully, like a forbidden gift hidden in a locked drawer. Every Saturday, as usual, was the day they drove together to the local cemetery to visit Liam's grave. It was a ritual that forced them close, a journey they had to take together, confronting the departed. That morning, the air was crisp, a thin mist blanketing the cemetery grounds. Emily wore a thin sweater, waiting for Thomas by the garage door. Thomas came out wearing his old green Carhartt jacket. He looked at Emily, his sensitive gaze pausing on her shoulders. You'll be cold dressed like that. There's wind on the road, he said, voice low and serious. I'm fine, Dad, Emily replied, but she could feel the chill already seeping into her skin. Thomas said nothing more, silently opening the door of the pickup truck. But as they were about to get in, he suddenly stopped. He took off his Carhartt jacket. The bold action happened so fast, Emily had no time to react. He draped the heavy coat, still carrying the warmth of his body over her shoulders. Put it on. The cemetery is still a ways away. His eyes avoided hers, looking straight ahead at the road. Emily stood stunned. The warmth from the coat rushed into her nose, the smell of motor oil, faint tobacco, and the dry sweat of a grown man. It was not merely physical warmth. It was protection full of quiet authority and possession. Emily's chest burned, a lump rising in her throat. She knew this gesture crossed the line of any ordinary relationship. It was personal, private, deeply intimate care. Dad, you wear it. I'm not that cold, Emily said softly, but she did not take it off. She clung to that warmth like a life preserver. I'm used to it. You wear it, Thomas answered, his voice firm, allowing no argument. He was left in only a thin t-shirt. His shoulders were broad and solid, but Emily saw him shiver slightly. They drove along the quiet suburban roads. Emily sat beside Thomas. The oversized coat made her look smaller. She felt the forbidden tenderness of the moment. Passing drivers might think they were father and daughter, a normal image, yet filled with an indescribable tension. When they arrived, they cleaned Liam's grave together. Thomas worked in silence, his hands quick and strong. Emily watched, seeing Thomas's shadow under the early morning sun, a solitary but resilient figure. While Thomas was arranging fresh flowers, Emily stepped closer. She placed her hand on his shoulder, not the clumsy, comforting touch of the rainy night, but a steady one full of understanding and companionship. "Dad, everything will be okay," she whispered. Thomas lifted his head. He looked straight into Emily's eyes. In this moment, right before Liam's grave, their inner conflict reached its climax. Thomas's gaze was a mixture of unending sorrow and a spark of desire to share the burden. That look was hauntingly sensual, not from lust, but from raw honesty and the need for connection in the most forbidden of circumstances. And then, the silent explosion happened. In a moment of weakness and desperate need for shelter, Emily committed her boldest act yet. Within the limits of emotion, she lightly rested her head on his shoulder just 1 second. Enough to feel his solid strength and steady breathing. Just 1 second. Thomas stood perfectly still. He didn't dare move. As if the slightest motion might shatter the wall of respect and duty he had built. He suppressed a deep breath. The silence between them was more suffocating than the air before a storm. Emily quickly pulled back, her cheeks burning with regret and shame. She realized she had just crossed a dangerous line with no way back. This touch, here of all places, had made the forbidden tangible. To break the heavy atmosphere, Thomas did what he often did when flustered. He added a touch of dry humor. "Hey, Emily," he said, voice slightly hoarse. "Back when Liam was little, he used to say he wanted to bury an ice cream cone here so a giant ice cream tree would grow. I had to scold him for having such wild ideas. Now, I miss the days he had those crazy thoughts." The short, halting story about his lost son ended with Thomas's crooked smile. Emily laughed, though the sound was strained. The tearing and guilt eased for a moment. Tension gave way to shared sorrow. After everything was done, they drove home. Thomas drove, Emily beside him. The coat remained on her shoulders. When they reached the house, Emily took off the Carhartt jacket. Thomas's warmth still lingered. She folded it carefully and brought it to his room. Thomas's bedroom door, usually kept closed, was left slightly ajar today. Emily knocked lightly. Thomas was sitting at his desk reading the paper. He turned. Emily stepped in, placed the jacket on the chair. As she did, her hand accidentally brushed his when he reached for it. This accidental touch carried more intimacy than the deliberate one at the grave. It was a wordless confirmation of what had happened. Emily quickly stepped back. Thank you, Dad. The jacket was really warm." Thomas gripped the coat tightly. He looked at Emily without speaking. His eyes were full of conflict, restraining yet satisfied that she had accepted his protection. Emily turned to leave, but she knew they had crossed a line. The shadow of the departed still lingered, but they had created a new connection, taboo yet undeniable, woven from warmth, from the coat, and from endless inner struggle. After the cemetery visit, the tension between Emily and Thomas did not lessen. It transformed into a new kind of sensitivity. They were closer, yet every action and word was now weighed more carefully. Emily, having crossed the ordinary boundary of respect with that brief headrest, still faced fierce inner conflict. She began to see Thomas not only as a father-in-law, but as the only man left in her life, the one who could provide the protection she craved. Thomas, in turn, built an invisible shield around Emily. He became quieter, but his eyes never left her. Whenever she entered the kitchen, he found ways to be near, not to talk, but to ensure she was safe. It was a silent possession, never intending to intrude, only accepting his role as the sole pillar. This fragile balance was broken by an outsider. On a Friday afternoon, Aunt Mary, a distant relative close to the family, came to visit. Mary was a middle-aged woman, practical and straightforward. After greetings and sharing condolences, Mary turned to the topic Emily and Thomas both tried to avoid. They were sitting in the living room with coffee. The atmosphere started warm but gradually grew stifling as Mary spoke. Her voice was calm, caring, yet full of interference. "Emily, it's been over half a year now. Poor thing, you're still so young. I think staying here like this isn't healthy. You should think about moving on. I know a nice man named Mark, mature, steady job. I can introduce you." Though well-intentioned, the words fell like cold water on the tense air between Emily and Thomas. Emily bowed her head, her coffee cup trembling slightly in her hands. Inner conflict surged. Part of her knew that she should escape this forbidden deadlock. The other part felt terror at the thought of leaving Thomas's protective circle, like a child abandoned. Before Emily could respond, Thomas spoke. His voice was low and unexpectedly firm. He set his coffee cup down with a small but sharp sound that drew attention. "Thank you for your concern, Mary. But this is something Emily has to decide for herself. She's only just beginning to find peace again. She still needs time." Thomas said nothing more, but his gaze fixed on Mary, a protective, possessive look, full of authority. It was almost a silent warning not to intrude on their private space. Emily looked up at Thomas. His direct intervention in her future had created a solid shield around her, right in front of someone else. She felt the intensity of the feeling he held for her, not romantic, but the primal protection of an older man. Mary sensed the tension and quickly changed the subject, but the seed of conflict had been planted. After Mary left, the house fell back into its familiar silence. This silence was heavier, containing a gentle lie just spoken. Thomas said Emily needed time, but both knew it was a way to avoid admitting the deep, forbidden connection that held them together. That night, the suffocation reached its peak. Emily couldn't sleep again. She went downstairs needing a glass of cold water to cool the burning inside her. When she reached the kitchen, she saw Thomas sitting at the table drinking a glass of water. The yellow kitchen light cast across his face, highlighting his honest features and exhaustion. He looked at her, not surprised, like the rainy night, but with an accepting gaze. Emily stepped forward, leaning against the counter opposite him. They were separated by a distance, yet the closeness felt more suffocating than ever. "Dad, when you said that to Aunt Mary, I'm afraid she'll misunderstand," Emily said softly, breaking the silence. Thomas set his glass down. He looked at her, eyes deep and unreadable. "Misunderstand what? I only told the truth. You need time, but you can't stay like this forever. You don't want to be a burden to me." Emily's voice trembled. She was close to tears. She didn't know whether she was confessing guilt or the desire to be held. Thomas stood and walked closer. He didn't touch her, only stood at a safe distance, yet close enough for Emily to feel his breath and authority. The air was so tense it could be felt on the skin. "Who said you're a burden? In this house, you're the last spark of life left," Thomas said, voice low, warm, and honest. "Don't overthink it. Whenever you want to leave, you can go, but right now, this is still our home, yours and mine. I need you here." The words, "I need you here," were not a declaration of love, but an admission of emotional dependence, a confession of loneliness, and the comfort Emily brought. They crossed every boundary of an ordinary relationship, becoming a forbidden, utterly sincere plea. Emily looked at him, eyes glistening, not with sadness, but with emotion at this overwhelmingly strong protection. She felt an invisible thread binding them together, a thread woven from emotional deprivation and shelter. She reached out and lightly placed her hand on the counter near his. No direct touch, but the nearness carried a stimulation more intense than any contact. It was a wordless resonance, a mutual acceptance of their impossible relationship. Thomas understood. He didn't pull his hand away, only looked straight at her. The flickering light from the altar corner spilled into the kitchen, creating blurred shadows on their faces, making the moment intimate and hazy. To break the suffocation, Emily gave a small laugh, trying to add a bit of humor. "If I stay like you say, Dad, I'll eat everything in the fridge you'll see." Thomas gave a faint smile, rare but warm. "Go ahead, if you finish everything. At least I'll have something to do, go grocery shopping." The tension eased again. They finished their water without another word about Mary or the future. Silence returned, but it was a confirmed silence, a sweet, hopeless harmony. Emily knew she would not leave. Thomas's gentle lie had created an unspoken promise. She would stay not from duty, but because she had found an irreplaceable warmth, a forbidden yet safe shelter, a love cloaked in the garment of protection and responsibility. After the hand-brushing incident and the silent explosion in the kitchen, the atmosphere in the two-story house became frighteningly still. Thomas almost avoided Emily. He spent most of his time in the garage fixing cars or working on the lawn, laboring intensely to create physical and emotional distance. His restraint was not only out of respect for the departed, but also self-protection from a powerful, forbidden emotion he had let grow. As for Emily, guilt and shame had reached their peak. She knew she was the one who had stretched that rubber band. Her craving for shelter and comfort had nearly destroyed the respect and duty both had tried to preserve. She couldn't let things continue this way. She needed a confrontation not to confess the impossible feelings, but to delicately reaffirm boundaries while still keeping the warmth they both needed. That afternoon, Emily stood in the kitchen heating a glass of milk not to drink, but to steady her emotions. She knew she had to talk to Thomas. She found him in the living room, reading an old newspaper. His posture was lonely and weary. His shadow covered the sofa, heavy and pitiable. Emily placed the warm milk on the coffee table. The heat spread a silent reminder of the nights Thomas had left milk by her door. "Dad, I want to talk for a moment," Emily said, gentle but firm. Thomas set the paper down. His eyes were calm and waiting. He knew this moment had to come. Emily did not sit. She stood there, maintaining a safe, respectful physical distance. "I know I've caused you a lot of worry lately. I also know you've carried everything so I could feel safe here. I'm very grateful." Emily spoke slowly. Every word was carefully chosen, avoiding anything that could hint at sensuality or reference what had happened. She was rebuilding the wall of respect she had almost destroyed. Thomas listened in silence. He didn't interrupt, only looked at her. His eyes held understanding and a touch of relief that she had spoken first. "I know both of us are lonely," Emily continued, "and your protection is the most precious thing I have right now. It helps me keep living, keep accepting this loss." Emily paused, taking a deep breath. This was the most important part, the redefinition of their forbidden relationship. "I will stay here," she declared. "Not out of duty or guilt, but because this place has the warmth and protection I need. I will see you as my only family left, and I hope you will see me as your only family left. Just that, nothing more." She made a promise without chains, an acceptance of a permanent boundary between them. Intimacy would stop at protection and mature familial love. Thomas remained silent for a long time. His stillness increased the pressure on Emily. He looked at the glass of milk, then directly into her eyes. This time, his gaze held no longing or conflict, only peace and acceptance after a storm. "I understand," Thomas said. His voice was warmer and truer than ever. "I will always protect you. This is your home, Emily." In a rare, decisive, and tender gesture, Thomas extended his rough hand. Emily understood. She stepped closer, placing her soft hand in his. It was a brief, firm handshake, devoid of desire, only acceptance of a complicated, impossible relationship. The warmth from his hand flowed into hers, a wordless confirmation. The boundary had been set, but the connection would never be severed. They would forever be two lonely souls leaning on each other, yet always keeping the distance of respect and duty. Emily withdrew her hand, offering a rare, serene smile. "I'm going to the kitchen to cook something fun to lighten the mood for the house. I bet you forgot seasoning in the soup again." She spoke, deliberately adding a touch of playfulness to the serious moment. Thomas laughed. His laughter was hearty and relieved. "Don't worry. I tasted it today. Make whatever you like." Emily turned and walked toward the kitchen. The door to their souls, after days of half-open suggestion, had now been properly repositioned. It would close tightly against the forbidden, but remain open for protection and mature familial love. Emily accepted this permanent boundary. She accepted that the warmth from a midnight glass of milk would forever be her greatest comfort, the only forbidden, deprived feeling she could have in this house. Forever shimmering and safe, like the soft glow of streetlights on winter nights.